I've lived in Minnesota for 20 years now, and I swear I don't recall it being light out at 9 o'clock at night before. But I'm pretty sure I can't blame that on global warming or something, so it's probably always been like this. Weird at beginning. This is Joshua, MVA Studio, Minneapolis, and I want to talk about intro level classes. So I'm about to teach an intro to typography class. It starts next week. It's a 10-week thing for adult people that are interested in typography. I've taught Foundation 2D in the past and intro to graphic design. And a friend of mine tweeted something about how would I approach an intro level class given my kind of anti-critique stance. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot because my approach to teaching these intro level classes has really changed pretty dramatically over the last decade of teaching. When I started teaching them, I think I taught them fairly similar to how I experienced them as a student, though I was trying to do better. And now I teach them really differently. And I think what I'm going to go through is my kind of fill in the blank number of commandments for teaching intro level courses. So my absolute first rule is do not teach the rules, history, or theory. I am a firm anti-believer in the idea that you should learn the rules before you break them. I think that that's completely asinine, and that's the thing that people say to keep themselves propped up in a hierarchy. So you can see how it'd be advantageous for an art school or a music school to say that you should learn the rules before you break them, because then you pay them to go there and learn the rules. I think that's terrible. I think unless you're doing very short-term projects, you want to avoid knowing the rules as much as possible so that you can develop your own perspective on the material, discipline, the activity. And then as you inevitably start to encounter the rules, whether it be because you want to strive to do better and you've plateaued on, or just that you're wondering, hey, I wonder what some of these rules are, you will have an instinctual understanding of whether they're good or bad, or whether they're stupid or necessary. You know, like you might encounter a rule and then be like, whoa, and it makes your work a lot better. But the way to get good, in my opinion, is you do as much as possible on your own. That's how you, when you're a kid, that's how you get good at everything. The easiest way to make an activity a drag when you're a kid is to learn all the rules. Like nobody wants to learn how to play baseball by having an actual professional Major League Baseball coach come in and immediately start critiquing form, right? You want to fall in love with hitting the ball or throwing the ball or whatever it might be. So that's my first one. No rules, no theory, no history. And then I think that what ends up happening is there's students in the grand scheme of their work who are naturally the kind of people who are interested in history and theory, and they will gravitate towards that. But I'd rather not be indoctrinating anyone. The second thing is quantity over quality. I'm a firm believer in this, and again, I think it goes back to how you learn things as a kid. You don't immediately try to do the best thing. You do it because you love it. In any given activity at the introductory level, you have to do a lot of it in order to make discoveries. So if you're doing like a Foundation 2D thing, or you're experimenting with materials, or you're working with typography, the more moves that you make, the more likely you are to make a discovery. The only way to do that is through a massive volume of work, most of which should be bad, or boring, or generic, or entry level. And that the more work you do, the more likely you are to get past that hill of the generic, boring, entry level stuff. But if you don't do that, then the only other option is for the teacher to make the discoveries for you, to explain what you should be trying to achieve or what kind of outcome that you should get to. So I like a quantity over quality thing, because what might happen is you do enough work, different people make different discoveries, and then I can point them out and be like, oh, check this out. Check out what happened over here. My third one would be the assignments should be unbelievably simple. And the reason for that is I think that, I made another video about the idea of intention in terms of a class. I think you should have intention in terms of an assignment. What is it you're trying to accomplish by having students do that assignment? And when you're trying to impart that like entry level, like I just want you to fall in love with the activity, the easiest way to do that is through the simplest means possible. So, if it's a Foundation 2D thing, it could be as simple as, sorry, some kind of bug, make something happen with 3 black squares. Just make something happen, something that's mildly intriguing to you, and then do 70 versions or whatever that could be. But you want to do a lot of it. So if you're doing type studies, you might put like a couple really simple parameters: 1 font, 1 size, 1 weight, black on white, do 1,000,000 versions. The simpler it is, the more likely it is to kind of stumble upon the discovery you're hoping that they'll make. And when it's that simple, the students who can find a way to undermine it, it's that much more interesting. In graphic design classes, I show as examples, like teaching examples, Swiss typography from like the 60s, 50s and 60s all the time. I like that stuff, but the reason that I show it so often is that very often those designers were trying to do one thing. So the super stripped down palette and the super stripped down choices that they're making meant that they illuminate their decisions really clearly. So then that work makes it super easy to teach a principle against. Like, oh, this is the thing about negative space. This is the thing about rhythm. This is the thing about transformation. This is the thing about whatever, a visual anchor. But it's that limitation of it. Whereas if I pull some complicated like 90s stuff, there's lessons to be learned there, but that clarity of like simple graphic design kind of discoveries, not as likely. So I try to make sure the assignments are really, really simple. Along with that, I want the assignments to be excuse proof. I want like any barrier to entry to be so unbelievably low. And it becomes easier when you're stripping away the desire to explain the discoveries or explain too many parameters at the beginning, because then there's just a couple things to do. I have this weird philosophy at this point where like any homework I give, with very few exceptions, I want you to be able to do it while you binge watch Netflix. I'm pretty sincere about that. I think the ideal situation is that you're sitting on your couch, you're working, you look up, and you haven't been paying attention to those last 2 or 3 episodes of The Walking Dead. That's the ideal thing, that the projects are simple enough, they're open-ended enough, and they're excuse-free enough that they become addictive, fun activities. They're like little puzzles or games to play. That's where I want to be. In an entry-level class, I always want it to be that you do not have to come up with an idea. So for like, if I'm doing a typography class, I want the content to be something so easy to grasp, and that I don't have to give you the content. I just have to give you a type of content that makes it easy to find. Go grab an alt weekly, find a concert to do a flyer for. Go through your Instagram, pull the last, 30 photos and captions, make a zine using those. What was the last thing you listened to before you got to school? Cool, make a record cover for that single. Super excuse proof, because like in an entry-level class, you just want to dive into working. It's not the place for concepts yet. Concepts get applied later, and they get applied more successfully when students have rich visual making skills. At least that's my belief. And that's why, like, as a teacher, like the most exciting thing you can have is the students who design for fun already. Because now all you have to do is then hit them with one, you have to illuminate the principles that they might not know, and then hit them with the ways to develop interesting, compelling content. But like when I taught Foundation 2D, we either did non-conceptual stuff or we did very rudimentary exercises with a list of like stuff. So I'd have like a grid of squares and I'd be like, delete stuff from this until it communicates this idea, or whatever that idea was, isolation or freedom or speed. So like in the typography class that we have coming up, we're going to design a lot of really simple stuff because we don't want the content to get in the way. If, like, for example, if you start trying to do really heavy stuff in a 2D class or in an intro to typography class, the problem is that the form gets outweighed by the content. And there's a time and a place for that. And I think one of the things you always kind of see, or I always saw that was kind of really compelling, was like the dude that directed the movie Run Lola Run, something Twiker, back in the 90s. One of the things in all the press about that dude was that he did an undergrad in film and a master's in philosophy, or vice versa. But his whole thing was he wanted to do the master's, or he wanted to do the philosophy background so he'd have something to make movies about. The political artist Sue Coe, she talked about doing I think she didn't even touch politics in her undergrad until she felt like she could paint at the level that she wanted to be able to paint at to do justice to the content. So that's why I think in the entry level stuff, I want almost frivolous content. Like, I debated the idea of whether like your first project should just be like a birthday card for a friend. We're not going to go that frivolous, even though your friend might appreciate it, but we're not going to get deep because I think it can be a distraction. And then I guess the last thing I would say is, in terms of the actual critiques, the ideal situation is just hang a bunch of stuff up, have no idea who made it, and then just walk around talking about stuff that's happened. Completely divorce it from the creators, and instead be like, there's the thing on the wall, this is what's interesting about the thing. And that's it. The problem with that is that you feel pressured to talk about everything, and if you talk about more than half, you gotta talk about everything. So that kind of sucks. So I think the thing I like to do is just to find a way to make it really breezy, to where it's just like, somebody talk about something that's awesome. And then like if Jane talks about James's thing, then I go like, okay, James, talk about something that's awesome. And then he walks over and grabs something else, and you just kind of bounce around the room, and then hopefully you've like at least looked at every bunch of stuff. But the most important thing to me, I think, is you talk about the stuff that works and you ignore the stuff that doesn't work. That runs counter to how I experienced school, which was like, we talked about what worked, and then we really talked about what didn't work. And I don't think that that's helpful or smart. I think the way to go is to ignore everything that doesn't work, because typically the stuff that doesn't work is conceptual, and we're not dealing with concepts. So I think the most important thing is, like, in those early stages, is like you double down on the stuff that's really awesome, the stuff that's like you're figuring out, and instead of trying to improve all the stuff that's not working, you kind of crowd it out. And that's one of the beauties of doing simple projects and having a lot of stuff due, like doing 20 versions, is then when it's on the wall, instead of trying to look at the one version, talk about what's good, but then talk about everything that's holding it back from being amazing. You don't even bother with that. You just talk about the one that's good, and then you go, okay, cool, do like 5 more versions with that principle, and let's just throw away everything else. That's how I feel like I deal with my work. That's not to say we won't talk about improvements across the board. Of course we will. But the focus is somebody talk about something that's awesome. That's been my philosophy for years now. But I get more and more committed to it as versioning and ideation play a bigger and bigger role in things. And especially once I got into this quantity over quality mindset, that's when it really becomes critical to just be like, once you're in that mode, you just start to assume that everything sucks and that there's just a couple things that are going to be great. So just point out those. And the other thing is, in an intro class, I don't believe in spending more than, say, 2 weeks on a project, maybe 3 weeks if it's complex. Like in this type class, we'll either do like a process book or some kind of zine. That's going to be a multi-page thing, so it might justify a 3-week project. But in general, everything is going to be like, do a ton of versions. Let's pick a couple that are good. Let's see if we can push those further, and then done. We're not going to tweak stuff out, because like the other thing is, it's an intro level class. In a year from now, you should think it all sucks anyway. So why invest so much time in it when I think the learning is in all the new things that you try, not the tweaking stuff out to make it perfect. Those are my kind of big ideas when it comes to teaching an intro class. So intro to typography, foundation 2D, intro to graphic design. I'm not sure how any of this would fly if I taught in an actual art program and taught like drawing classes, but I would never teach a drawing class. That would be awful. So never mind. It doesn't matter. For me, this is like teaching design, and I'll back it up. The one thing that I think is more important than anything, it's the value I hold highest above all else, is I want that intro level class to be addicting. I want it to be more fun than anything else that you could be doing with your time. So I used to think that these things should be like hard and like you do a lot of work and you like hold yourself to a high standard and blah blah blah. And then you'd see kids who go through those kind of like educational experiences, they still suck a year later or 2 years later. So like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of torturing everyone when, for me, the best work comes out of being excited, joyful, happy. You know, like that's what I want out of work. So my bias then is like, that's what I want the students to get out of the work. They can be, even if they love being miserable and overworked, they can do that on someone else's projects. On my shit, I want it to be addictive. Like, I want these little simple projects to be like a hit of a cigarette that you just can't resist, and you keep doing more and more and more, and pretty soon you're a cigarette smoker. So you might be a painter, but my goal is like, you're not gonna be a typographer because I trained you. You're gonna be a typographer because you fucking love it. So those are a few of my thoughts on teaching. If you've got any follow-up questions, leave them below. Please subscribe. Have a good night.